Section 6 of The Whys of Cooking by Janet McKenzie Hill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Cakes. Cake is classed with candy as a luxury for occasional rather than daily use. Expensive materials enter into the composition of cake, and unless these are improved by the combination, it were better to eat them as they are than to waste time and effort in combining them. The two things essential to success in cake making are the mixing of the materials and the baking of the mixture. One may learn to mix cakes in an hour, but skill in baking cake comes only from considerable experience, yet most housekeepers learn to bake cake before attempting many less difficult matters. Two varieties of cake are recognized: sponge cake, made without shortening, and cup cake, made with shortening. A perfect sponge cake should be slightly moist, very tender, and filled with minute bubbles of uniform size. Potato flour, usually sold in pound packages, fine granulated sugar, a clean fresh lemon, and fresh laid eggs are the ingredients necessary for the choicest sponge cake. Potato flour thickens more than wheat flour, and only half the quantity designated for wheat flour is required. It makes an exceedingly delicate and tender cake. A sponge cake when baked should never be brown, but of a pale yellow color both without and within. In mixing a shortened cake, the creaming of the shortening is the first step in the process, and also the most important. The thorough beating of the mixture after the addition of all the ingredients but the egg whites, and a short beating after the addition of the whites, gives a fine grained cake. If pastry flour be not at hand, bread flour may be used in cake making by removing 1 level tablespoonful from each cupful of flour called for in the recipe. The whys in cake making. 1. Why should all the ingredients and utensils to be used be assembled before beginning to mix a cake? Answer. For best results, the mixing of the batter should be a continuous process, and it should be baked immediately after the addition of the flour and leavening agents. 2. Why cream the Crisco first instead of creaming Crisco and sugar together? Answer. If both saves time and is easier, requires less effort, to cream the shortening first and then gradually cream the sugar into it. 3. In cold weather, why rinse the mixing bowl in warm water or leave the Crisco in the room a short time before trying to cream it? Answer. Crisco, as all shortening, is put into a smooth, creamy condition most easily when it is about the temperature of the living room, or 68° Fahrenheit. 4. For what reason do we use an earthen bowl and a slitted wooden spoon for beating sugar into shortening? Answer. A metal bowl or spoon will discolor the sugar and shortening. Also, a slitted spoon, by presenting more surface than a solid spoon, makes the work easier. 5. Why use pastry flour for cake? Answer. Cake is a luxury and should be of as delicate a texture as possible. The flour is used to hold together richer articles, and flour with little body or substance is desirable. 6. Why use Crisco as shortening in cake? Answer. Crisco gives a very white cake of the same texture as when butter is used, at half the expense. 7. Why use fine granulated sugar in cake mixtures? Answer. Fine granulated sugar makes the best cake. Coarse granulated sugar gives a coarse grained cake, powdered sugar a dry cake. 8. Why beat the yolks and whites of eggs for cake separately? Answer. Whites and yolks of eggs may be beaten lighter if beaten separately. A cake should be light that the digestive juices may penetrate it readily. 9. Why beat a cake mixture, lightened with baking powder or cream of tartar and soda, after the addition of the stiff beaten egg whites? Answer. If the egg whites were folded into a shortened cake mixture, the cake would in spots be too porous and dry. Beaten in thoroughly, the finished product is uniformly fine-grained and tender throughout. Beating is the last motion given to a shortened cake mixture. 10. Why should no motion but that of folding be used in combining a sponge cake mixture after the sugar is beaten into the yolks? Answer. A proper sponge cake is lightened entirely by the air beaten into the eggs and the expansion of that air in baking. By folding in the flour and stiff beaten whites of eggs, the air beaten into the eggs is not lost. By stirring the mixture, the delicate air cells are broken down and the cake will be heavy. 11. Why should the heat of the oven be moderate when the cake mixture is set into it? Answer. The heat of the oven should be moderate at first, that there be time for the formation of the bubbles of gas which are to lighten it. If the oven be too hot, the outside is cooked before the gas is fully evolved. Then, when the gas is formed, it breaks out at the weakest spot, or if the oven be very hot, the cake will be heavy, having baked before it has had time to rise to its full height. 12. Why does a cake batter, in baking sometimes, rise high in the middle, crack open, and run out? Answer. Usually the above condition is occasioned by too hot an oven at first. The heat browns and crusts over the top of the cake before it has penetrated to the center. Later on, when the heat reaches the center, the bubbles of gas formed will burst out at the weakest point. 13. When is stronger heat needed? After the cake is risen, at the beginning of the baking, or at the last of the baking? Answer. Strong heat is needed after the cake has risen to make the cell walls firm enough to stand up. In the first quarter of the time of baking, the cake should rise to its full height. In the second quarter, it should brown over in spots. In the third quarter, brown all over, and in the last quarter, dry off and settle in the pan. As the baking is practically done before the last quarter is reached, the heat may be gradually lessened during this period. 14. Why is it that it is not advisable to move a cake in the oven during the second and third quarters of baking? Answer. When a cake is risen to its full height and the cell walls have not become fixed by heat, the jar of moving will cause them to fall or settle, and as the leavening agents have done their work, no more gas can be evolved to send up the cake, and consequently it will be heavy. 15. Why should the oven door be opened and shut with care while a cake is in the oven? Answer. If the oven door be slammed shut hard, the jar might cause the cake to fall. The oven door may be opened a reasonable number of times during the baking of a cake, if it be opened and shut gently. In all ovens except the electric, the heat of the oven must be regulated by opening the door often and noting the appearance of the cake. 16. Why is a cake when baked sometimes crisp, rough, and uneven on the edges? Answer. A cake in which all the ingredients are properly proportioned is smooth on the edges. The opposite condition is usually due to too much sugar or shortening, or too little flour. There must be flour enough to combine with all the sugar and shortening used, otherwise the excess in sugar and shortening will be found cooked together on the edges. 17. Why is it of no use to add flavoring extracts to a cake mixture? Answer. The volatile extracts are dissipated in baking. Grated rind of an orange or lemon may be used in certain cakes. In other cakes, add extracts to frostings and fillings when they are cold and flavor the cake in this way. 18. Why are cakes made with either yolks of eggs or molasses baked in a cooler oven than cakes with whites of eggs and sugar? Answer. Yolks of eggs contain a large proportion of fat. Both fat and molasses burn easily, and the temperature of the oven must be regulated accordingly. 19. Why wash down with tips of fingers or cloth wet in cold water the inside of the saucepan in which sugar and water are being cooked for boiled frosting? Answer. Water is used on the inside of the saucepan to remove grains of sugar, which if left would make the frosting grainy. To obviate this still more, cover the saucepan while the sugar boils 3 or 4 minutes, to steam and melt any grains of sugar thrown up in cooking. Then uncover and let boil undisturbed to the right degree. 20. Why not beat the eggs for frosting or for a cake mixture some time in advance of use? Answer. Whites of eggs beaten stiff will liquefy on standing, and cannot again be beaten light. They will make neither satisfactory cake nor frosting. 21. Why not beat the whites of eggs for the cake, and then a little later use the egg beater without washing to beat whites of eggs for frosting? Answer. Whites of eggs, except on the rarest occasions, cannot be beaten light unless the egg beater be absolutely clean and dry. 22. Why should a pan in which cake containing shortening is to be baked be lined with a strip of Criscoed paper the exact width of the pan and with ends hanging over? Answer. The cake when baked and cooled slightly may be lifted in perfect shape from the pan by the ends of paper. Also, if the cake should be burned slightly on the bottom, this portion may be removed with the paper to which it will adhere. A burned surface may also be removed from a cake with a lemon grater, after which the surface should be brushed with a clean whisk broom kept for the purpose. 23. Why bake a sponge cake in an ungreased pan? Answer. A sponge cake properly made, without shortening, and baked will adhere to an ungreased surface. Then when baked it may be turned upside down, and the cell walls will be elongated while the cake hung from the bottom of the tins is drying out and cooling. 24. Why set some cookie and ginger snap mixtures aside to chill before rolling and cutting into shape? Answer. Mixtures that are to be rolled may be handled when mixed quite soft with but little flour, if the mixture be first hardened by chilling. Directions or recipes for cookies, etc., say flour for a soft dough. The smaller the quantity of flour, as a general rule, the richer and better are cookies and ginger snaps. An expert can handle a softer dough than an amateur. By chilling the mixture it stiffens and can be handled without the use of so much flour. Emily's White Cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sugar, 3 cupfuls flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1 cupful water, 1 teaspoonful flavoring, whites of 3 eggs. Cream Crisco. Add sugar slowly and cream together. Sift dry ingredients and add alternately with the liquid. Add flavoring, beat mixture thoroughly, and last fold in stiffly beaten whites of eggs. Prepare layer cake tins by greasing them with a mixture of Crisco and flour. Pour in cake mixture. Put in moderate oven, allow to rise for 5 minutes, increase heat to bake. At the end of 15 minutes, reduce heat to allow cake to shrink from the pan. Entire time for baking 20 minutes. Kate B. Vaughn. Chocolate frosting. 1 cupful granulated sugar, 1 cupful boiling water, 6 squares chocolate, confectioner's sugar as needed, 1 teaspoonful vanilla extract. Melt the sugar in the boiling water, cover and let boil 3 or 4 minutes. Add the chocolate broken in pieces and let melt over boiling water. Then beat in the sugar sifted and the extract. Use sugar to make the frosting of a consistency to spread and not run from the cake. If it becomes too stiff before it is spread, add boiling water or syrup a few drops at a time. Things to remember in connection with these recipes. When cake is not a success, it is not the fault of the Crisco. Either too much was used, the oven heat not perfectly controlled, or some important ingredient was used in the wrong proportion. Crisco should be creamed with the sugar more thoroughly than butter, as Crisco contains no moisture to dissolve the sugar. Atlantics. 1 egg yolk, 1/2 cupful Crisco melted, 1/2 cupful molasses, 1/2 cupful boiling water, 1 teaspoonful soda, 1 tablespoonful ginger, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 2 1/2 cupfuls sifted flour. About. Frosting. 1 cupful sugar, 4 tablespoonfuls boiling water, 1 egg white, 12 fresh marshmallows, 1 teaspoonful vanilla, coconut if desired. Beat the egg yolk and add it to the Crisco, molasses, and water. Sift the soda, ginger, salt, and flour into the first ingredients and mix thoroughly. Let chill in the refrigerator, then roll into a sheet and cut into rounds. Bake in a moderate oven. More flour may be needed. The cake should not spread in cooking, but should be as soft as possible. For the frosting, dissolve the sugar in the boiling water. With the tips of the fingers wet repeatedly in cold water, wash down the sides of the pan, cover and let the syrup boil 3 minutes. Uncover and let boil until when tested in cold water a soft ball may be formed. With the thermometer cook to 238 degrees or 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Pour the syrup in a fine stream on the white of egg beaten dry, beating constantly meanwhile. When all the syrup has been added to the egg, add the marshmallows, beat with a spoon until melted, then beat with an egg beater until very light, adding the vanilla meanwhile, then spread on the top of the cakes. Cocoanut may be added if desired. Jelly roll. 2 eggs beaten light, 1 cupful granulated sugar, grated rind 1 lemon, 1/3 cupful hot water, 1 tablespoonful Crisco, 1 cupful flour, 1 1/2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, currant jelly, confectioner's sugar. Gradually beat the sugar into the eggs, add the grated rind, the Crisco melted in the hot water, and the flour sifted with the baking powder and salt. Beat all together thoroughly and turn into a shallow pan lined with a well Criscoed paper. Bake about 18 minutes, turn at once onto a clean cloth, trim off the crisp edges on the 4 sides, spread with jelly and roll over and over, keeping the cloth between the fingers and the cake. Roll the roll of cake in the cloth. When ready to serve, sift confectioner's sugar over the top of the cake. Orange Gold Cake. 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1/2 cupful sugar, 4 egg yolks, grated rind 1 orange, 1/3 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 cupful milk, 1 cupful sifted flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder. Frosting. 1 cupful sugar, 1/4 cupful boiling water, 2 egg whites, 1/2 teaspoonful orange extract, 1/4 teaspoonful almond extract. Cream the Crisco. Beat in the sugar, the yolks, beaten light, the grated rind and salt, and alternately the milk and the flour sifted with the baking powder. Bake in a round Criscoed pan, 7 inches in diameter, about 20 minutes. When the cake is cold, invert it and cover the surface with the frosting. Melt the sugar in the water, wash down the inside of the pan, cover and let cook 3 or 4 minutes, then uncover and let cook until a soft ball may be formed when the syrup is tested in cold water. Pour, in a fine stream, on the whites of eggs beaten very light, beating constantly meanwhile. Continue to beat until cold, add the flavoring, and use as above. Recipes. Fudge Cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful granulated sugar, 3 eggs beaten light, 4 ounces chocolate, 3 tablespoonfuls sugar, 3 tablespoonfuls hot milk, 1/2 cupful milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful cinnamon. Cream the Crisco. Gradually beat in the sugar, then the eggs, beaten light. Melt the chocolate over hot water, add the small measure of sugar and the hot milk, and mix thoroughly. Then beat into the first mixture, lastly add, alternately, the milk and the flour, sifted with the baking powder and cinnamon. Bake in 2 layers, about 18 minutes, or in a sheet about 25 minutes. Baked in layers, put soft filling between them, frosting on top. Frosting for fudge cake. 2 cupfuls granulated sugar, 3 tablespoonfuls molasses or caramel syrup, 1/2 cupful boiling water, 1 teaspoonful Crisco, 2 egg whites. Melt the sugar in the molasses and boiling water. Wash down the saucepan. Cover and let boil about 4 minutes. Uncover, add the Crisco and let boil to the soft ball stage, 238 degrees Fahrenheit. Pour the syrup in a fine stream on the egg whites, beaten very light, beating constantly meanwhile. Pour the frosting into the saucepan in which the syrup was boiled, set it over a dull fire on an asbestos mat or over boiling water, and stir and beat until it thickens perceptibly. Then spread on the cake, leaving the surface rough. Soft filling. 2 cupfuls brown sugar, 1/2 cupful sweet milk, 1 tablespoonful Crisco, 2 tablespoonfuls flour, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, 1 tablespoonful vanilla. Melt the sugar in the milk and heat to the boiling point. Cream the Crisco, beat in the flour and salt, and dilute with a little of the hot syrup. Stir until boiling, then let simmer, stirring occasionally. 10 minutes, add the vanilla, let cool a little, and use. Mocha cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sugar, 3 eggs beaten without separating, 3 cupfuls flour, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1 cup milk. Cream the Crisco and beat in half the sugar. Gradually beat the rest of the sugar into the beaten eggs and beat the two mixtures together. Sift together the flour, baking powder, and salt, and add to the egg Crisco mixture, alternately with the milk. Bake in 3 layers about 18 minutes, or in a large sheet about 25 minutes. Use mocha frosting between the layers and on top of the layer cakes, or over the bottom of the inverted sheet of cake. Sprinkle the frosting with 1 cupful of chopped pecan nut meats. Mocha frosting. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sifted confectioner's sugar, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, about 1/4 cupful very black coffee or coffee extract, 2 squares melted chocolate if desired. Cream the Crisco, beat in the sugar gradually, add the salt and beat in the coffee a few drops at a time, then the chocolate if used. Fruit and nut cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 1 cupful citron, raisins and nuts chopped fine, 3 eggs beaten light, 1 cupful milk, 3 cupfuls flour, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt. Cream the Crisco, gradually beat in the sugar, then the fruit and nuts, the eggs, and alternately the milk and the flour sifted with the baking powder and salt. Bake in a pan 8 by 12 inches, lined with a Criscoed paper. Sift 2 tablespoonfuls of granulated sugar over the top of the cake before baking. Lemon cake. 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 2 eggs beaten light, 1/2 cupful milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt. Cream the Crisco, beat in the sugar and eggs, then alternately the milk and flour sifted with the baking powder and salt. Bake the cake in 2 layers, put the filling between the layers, and sift confectioner's sugar over the top. Filling. 1 egg beaten light, 1 lemon grated rind and juice, 1 cupful sugar, 2 tablespoonfuls Crisco. Put all the ingredients into a double boiler, stir, and cook until the mixture thickens. Lemon citron cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sugar, 2 egg yolks beaten light, grated rind 1/2 lemon, 1/2 cupful milk, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 2 cupfuls flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3 egg whites beaten dry, 2 ounces citron. Cream the Crisco, beat half the sugar into the Crisco, the other half into the yolks, then beat the two together. Add the lemon rind and alternately the milk and the salt, flour and baking powder sifted together. Lastly, the whites of eggs. When putting the cake into the pan, add the citron here and there. Bake in a round tube pan about 45 minutes, or in a biscuit pan about 30 minutes. Oatmeal macaroons. 1 egg beaten light, 1/2 cupful sugar, 1/2 tablespoonful melted Crisco, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, scant, 1 1/4 cupfuls rolled oats. Beat the sugar into the egg, add the Crisco, salt, and rolled oats and mix all together thoroughly. Shape in small rounds on a Criscoed baking sheet. Bake in a moderate oven. The recipe makes 18 cakes. Denver or high altitude cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco less 1 tablespoonful, 1 cupful sugar, 1/2 cupful milk, 2 cupfuls pastry flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3 egg whites beaten dry. Cream the Crisco and gradually beat in the sugar. Add the flour sifted with the baking powder, alternately with the milk, then the whites of eggs, Beat vigorously and turn into 3-layer cake pans. Bake about 20 minutes. Put the layers together and cover the outside of the cake with chocolate frosting. By using a boiled frosting, white, in which chopped raisins, nuts, and figs are beaten, a good Lady Baltimore cake results. Chocolate frosting. 2 squares or ounces chocolate, 1 1/2 cupfuls granulated sugar, 1/2 cupful milk, 2 egg whites beaten very light, 1/2 teaspoonful vanilla extract. Melt the chocolate over hot water, add 3 tablespoonfuls each of the sugar and milk and stir and cook until smooth and boiling, then add the rest of the sugar and milk and cook until a little dropped into cold water may be gathered into a rather firm, soft ball, 240° Fahrenheit at sea level, 220° Fahrenheit high altitude on the sugar thermometer. Pour the syrup in a fine stream on the egg whites, beating constantly meanwhile. Add the vanilla and use as soon as the frosting will remain in place. Jelly cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/4 cupful sugar, 2 egg yolks beaten light, 1/2 cupful milk, 2 cupfuls flour, 2 1/2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1 egg white beaten dry. Cream the Crisco. Beat in the sugar and the yolks, then alternately the milk and the flour sifted with the baking powder and salt, and lastly the white of egg beat vigorously. Bake in 2-layer cake pans about 15 minutes. Put the layers together with fruit jelly and cover top and sides with confectioner's egg frosting. To the leftover white of egg add half a teaspoonful of orange extract and the juice of half a lemon or 2 tablespoonfuls of cream. Water may be used, and stir in sifted confectioner's sugar to make a frosting that will not run from the cake. Favorite high altitude cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 4 egg yolks beaten light, 1 1/2 cupfuls granulated sugar, 3/4 cupful milk or water, 3 cupfuls pastry flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 4 egg whites beaten very light. Cream the Crisco. Gradually beat half the sugar into the Crisco and half into the beaten yolks. Then beat the 2 mixtures together. Add, alternately, the liquid and the flour sifted with the baking powder and salt, and lastly the whites of eggs. Bake in 3-layer cake pans. Put the layers together with soft filling and sift confectioner's sugar over the top. This cake may also be made successful at sea level. Here it is close grained but tender. Mocha frosting is particularly appropriate for frosting. Lord Baltimore cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 3 egg yolks beaten light, 1/4 cupful milk, 1/4 cupful water, 2 cupfuls flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3 egg whites beaten dry. Cream the Crisco, gradually beat in the sugar, the yolks, and alternately the milk and water with the flour and baking powder sifted together. Beat in the whites of the eggs. Bake in 3-layer pans about 18 minutes. Put the layers together and cover the outside with the following frosting. Frosting for Lord Baltimore cake. 1 1/2 cupfuls granulated sugar, 1/2 cupful boiling water, 2 egg whites beaten dry, 1/2 cupful macaroon crumbs, 1/2 cupful nut meats chopped, 1/3 cupful candied cherries cut fine, 1/2 teaspoonful vanilla extract, 1/2 teaspoonful orange extract. Melt the sugar in the water, wash down the inside of the saucepan with the tips of the fingers wet repeatedly in cold water. Cover and let cook about 3 minutes. Uncover and cook until soft ball may be formed in cold water, 238° Fahrenheit. Pour in a fine stream on the egg whites, beating constantly meanwhile. Add the other ingredients and beat until the mixture will hold its shape. Cocoanut and chocolate jumbles. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 2 tablespoonfuls milk, 2 eggs beaten light, 2 1/2 cupfuls pastry flour, 1 teaspoonful salt, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 cupful cocoanut, grated rind 1 lemon, 2 squares chocolate melted, 1/2 teaspoonful cinnamon. Cream the Crisco and beat in the sugar, milk, eggs, and flour sifted with the salt and baking powder. Divide the dough and add the cocoanut and lemon rind to one half, the chocolate and cinnamon to the other half. Add flour as needed to make a dough that may be rolled into a sheet. Cut out with a doughnut cutter, dredge with sugar, and bake. If preferred, omit the lemon rind and use all the ingredients in one mixture, but cakes of two colors are attractive. Ribbon cake. 1 cupful Crisco less 2 tablespoonfuls. 2½ cupfuls sugar. 4 eggs. 1 cupful milk. 4 cupfuls and 2 tablespoonfuls flour. 4½ teaspoonfuls baking powder. 1 cupful currants chopped. 1½ cupfuls raisins chopped. 1/4 pound citron chopped. 2 teaspoonfuls molasses. Cream the Crisco. Beat in the sugar, the eggs beaten without separating the whites and yolks, and alternately the milk and flour sifted with the baking powder. Bake 2/3 of the mixture in 2-layer cake pans. To the other third add the fruit and molasses and bake in a pan of same size and shape as those used for the other 2 layers. Use the layer with fruit for the middle layer of the cake. Put the layers together with fruit jelly and cover the top with icing. Newport cake. 7/8 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sifted pastry flour, 1 teaspoonful baking powder, 3/4 teaspoonful salt, 5 egg yolks, 1 1/2 cupfuls sifted powdered sugar, grated rind 1 lemon or orange, 5 egg whites beaten dry, 1 tablespoonful milk. Cream the Crisco, gradually beat it into the flour. Sift it again with the baking powder and salt. Beat the yolks until thick and lemon colored, then gradually beat the sugar into them. Gradually beat the yolks and sugar with grated rind into the Crisco and flour mixture. Lastly, beat in the whites of eggs and the milk. Bake in a loaf 1 hour, in a sheet about 45 minutes. The heat of the oven should be moderate, especially at first. The cake is very fine grained, tender, and delicate. Cover with any white frosting flavored with half a teaspoonful each of orange and lemon extract. Gala cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 3 whole eggs beaten light, 1 cupful sugar, 3 cupfuls flour, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1 cupful milk. Cream the Crisco, gradually beat half the sugar into the Crisco and half into the eggs. Do not separate the eggs. Then beat the 2 mixtures together. Sift together the flour, baking powder, and salt, and add to the first mixture, alternately with the milk. Bake in a well Criscoed pan, 11 by 8 inches, about half an hour. Invert the cake on a wire cooler, and when nearly cold spread the bottom top when inverted with Gala frosting. 4 tablespoonfuls molasses. 2 cupfuls granulated sugar. 1/2 cupful boiling water. 2 egg whites beaten stiff. 1/2 teaspoonful vanilla extract. Stir the molasses, sugar, and water until the sugar is dissolved with the tips of the fingers, and wet repeatedly in cold water. Wash down the inside of the saucepan. Cover and let boil 3 or 4 minutes. Uncover and let boil until a little of the syrup may be gathered into a soft ball when tested in cold water, or to 238° Fahrenheit on the sugar thermometer. Turn in a fine stream on the egg whites, beating constantly meanwhile. Return the frosting to the fire over boiling water or on an asbestos mat, and beat constantly until it thickens a little. Then spread over the cake, leaving the surface rough. Spiced ginger layer cake. 1/3 cupful Crisco, 1/2 cupful sugar, 1/2 cupful molasses, 1 cupful sour milk thick, 1 3/4 cupfuls pastry flour, 1 teaspoonful soda, 1/2 teaspoonful salt scant, 1 teaspoonful cinnamon, 1 teaspoonful ginger, fruit jelly, 1 cupful cream whipped, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar. Beat the Crisco to a cream and gradually beat in the sugar and molasses. Sift together the flour, soda, salt, cinnamon, and ginger, and add to the first mixture, alternately with the sour milk. Beat all together thoroughly. Bake in 2-layer cake pans. Put the layers together with jelly between, and spread the cream whipped and mixed with the sugar on top. Chopped nuts may be sprinkled over the cream. Roxbury Nut Cakes. 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1/2 cupful sugar, 2 egg yolks, 1/2 cupful molasses, 1/2 cupful thick sour milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls pastry flour, 1 teaspoonful cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoonful cloves, 1 teaspoonful soda, 2 egg whites beaten very light, 1 cupful nut meats chopped. Cream the Crisco and beat in the sugar, yolks, molasses, and sour milk. Beat in the dry ingredients sifted together, then the egg whites and nuts. Bake in 18 small tins, frost or not as desired. Date cookies. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 1 egg beaten light, grated rind 1 lemon or orange, 1/2 cupful milk, 3 cupfuls flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 pound dates, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar. Cream the Crisco and gradually beat in the sugar. Add the egg and grated rind. Sift together the flour, baking powder, and salt, and add to the first mixture, alternately with the milk. Chill the dough if convenient. More flour may be needed. The cookies should not spread in baking. Take the dough onto a floured board a little at a time. Knead slightly, roll thin, and cut in rounds. Lift half the rounds to a baking sheet. Spread with the stoned dates cooked with the sugar and chopped. Brush the edge with water, cover with the other half of the cakes, pressing the edges together closely. Dredge with granulated sugar. Bake in a moderate oven. Figs or canned pineapple, grated, may be used in place of the dates. Ginger snaps. 1 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful molasses, 1 cupful brown sugar, 1 egg beaten light, 1 tablespoonful ginger, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1 teaspoonful soda, flour as needed. Put the Crisco, molasses, and sugar over the fire to melt the Crisco and sugar, then let boil about 6 minutes after boiling begins. When cooled somewhat lukewarm, add the egg, with the ginger, salt, soda, and 3 cupfuls of flour sifted together. Stir to a dough, adding flour as required. Knead on a board, roll into a thin sheet, cut into rounds, and bake in a moderate oven. Let the first 3 ingredients boil until a little of the mixture dropped into cold water may be gathered into a soft ball. Plain cake. 1/4 cupful Crisco, 3/4 cupful sugar, 2 eggs, 1/2 cupful milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls flour, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 teaspoonful cinnamon, 3 tablespoonfuls sugar. Beat the Crisco to a cream, then gradually beat in the sugar. Add the eggs beaten light without spreading the whites and yolks. Sift together the flour, salt, and baking powder, and add to the first mixture, alternately with the milk. Turn into a pan about 8 by 9 inches, mix the sugar and cinnamon, and sift it over the top of the cake. Bake about 18 minutes. Lady Baltimore Cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 1/2 cupfuls sugar, 3/4 cupful water, 2 1/2 cupfuls flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 4 egg whites beaten stiff. Cream the Crisco. Gradually beat in the sugar, alternating at the last with some of the water. Sift the dry ingredients and add, alternately, with the rest of the water. Beat the mixture until smooth, add the whites of the eggs and beat thoroughly. Bake in 3 well Criscoed layer cake pans about 18 minutes. Put the layers together and cover the outside with the following frosting. Frosting for Lady Baltimore Cake. 3 cupfuls granulated sugar, 1 cupful boiling water, 3 egg whites beaten stiff, 1 cupful chopped raisins, 1 cupful chopped nut meats, 5 figs cut in bits, 1/2 teaspoonful vanilla extract, 1/3 teaspoonful rose extract, 1/3 teaspoonful lemon extract. Melt the sugar in the water, cover and let boil until a soft ball may be formed in cold water. Pour in a fine stream on the egg whites, beating constantly meanwhile. Add the fruit, nuts, and flavoring, and beat until cool enough to use. White Fig Cake. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 1 cupful sugar, 1/4 cupful milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls flour, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 4 egg whites, 6 figs, 3 tablespoonfuls sugar. Beat the Crisco to a cream and gradually beat in the sugar. Sift together the flour, salt, and baking powder and add to the Crisco mixture, alternately with the milk. Lastly, add the whites of eggs beaten very light and beat vigorously. Bake in 2 small layer cake pans about 15 minutes. Cook 5 or 6 figs in boiling water until the figs are tender and the water well evaporated. Chop fine, add 3 tablespoonfuls of sugar and stir until boiling, then use as a filling between the 2 layers. Mix a cupful and a half of sifted confectioner's sugar with a little boiling water, about 3 tablespoonfuls, and half a teaspoonful of orange extract, and spread over the top of the cake. Soft molasses cookies. 1 cupful melted Crisco, 1 1/3 cupfuls molasses, 1 cupful brown sugar, 1 cupful thick sour milk, 1 teaspoonful vinegar, 1 egg beaten light, 5 cupfuls flour, 2 teaspoonfuls soda, 1 tablespoonful ginger, 1 tablespoonful cinnamon, 1 teaspoonful salt. Put the liquid ingredients into a bowl, sift the soda into the flour, add the salt and spices, and sift all together into the liquid mixture. Keep the dough as soft as can be handled, roll out, cut in thick cookies, and bake in a quick oven. By chilling the mixture overnight, less flour will be needed. End of section 6.